Hello, this is Timothy Perfett from Twocanoes Software, and today I wanted to show you how to deploy a Winclone image through a package with MDS. Just to kind of go over the basics about how to create the package and then how to actually deploy it to a bunch of different machines. Before I get started, please just take a moment and just click subscribe for the channel so you can get notified of more of these videos. I do videos on a regular basis from anywhere from Winclone to some tips and tricks on Mac OS as well as MDS and other software that we release. So hopefully if you're watching this video, you're already familiar with Winclone and you know how to create a Winclone image. We won't be covering that, but we can see that I have a Winclone image here on the desktop. And now I want to deploy this to, let's say, a lab full of Macs or 100 different Macs that came in that we want to put dual boot onto. So in order to do that, we'll use the package feature of Winclone Pro. So I'll click on Create Package and look at the options. The first thing we do is we want to select the image. So I'll select this image. And that image was created with Winclone. And then I'll select my options. So the first thing is partitioning options. This really depends on how your Macs are already set up. If they already have a Bootcamp partition on it, you can just say restore to an existing partition. I like to do that and then click on automatically detect the Windows partition. And so it'll find out which one it is and restore onto that. But we also want to select this option, which is create it. And since we can do both, what it means is it will look to see does a Winclone partition or a Bootcamp partition exist? If it does, restore to it. If not, it'll create one. And we'll go ahead and create a Bootcamp partition as a percentage of the disk and restore to it, so it's 50%. So that's pretty much all we need to do in order to create this package. So I'll click on Create Package, and I will save it into my Packages folder for MDS resources, and I'll call this Windows 10 and hit Return. And now it's completed. So now we saved off this Winclone image into a package. So if I quit Winclone Pro and I look in my resources, I'll see inside this Packages folder, I have a Windows 10. I also put in some additional packages I want to install onto this Mac. I want to install Boot Runner, so it allows me to easily do dual boot configuration. I also have Microsoft Office, and I numbered these so they'll install at kind of the relative times. So it'll install Boot Runner first and then Microsoft Office. Not necessarily necessary, but I just like to keep them organized. Also, the things when setting up this Mac, I also have some profiles. I have a certificate that installed for an internal server, and then a Wi-Fi config to be able to get on the Wi-Fi. And then I also have a script in here, two scripts actually. One sets the default dock, and the other one sets the default background to kind of brand the machine. And so what MDS does is it will install Mac OS and install all those packages. But the twist on it for this video is that we're going to throw in the mix a Winclone package. And I'm going to show you how to use MDS to install that package first so it can partition the drive and do it very quickly. So let me close that out and I'll open up MDS. And the first thing I'll do is I'll create a new workflow because that's what we really want to do. And we'll give a description. We'll call this Dual Boot Lab. And I'll give a description, Mac OS Mojave with Windows 10 Boot Camp, and we also installed profiles, default desktop, and branding. And then for the Mac OS, I will select the Mac OS installer, which is the Mac OS High Sierra, we want to do Mojave. So we downloaded that from the App Store, and I just put it into this folder on the desktop. So now it'll install Mojave. And I want to erase the whole drive and install Mojave on it. I don't want to keep any of the data. Now for the resources, I want to select where my packages are, and I'll just select that same packages I saved the Winclone image to. And I'll open that up. And you can see there's these little up-down arrows. If I click on that, it'll allow me to set the order. And the important thing for the Winclone package is to do it before Mac OS installation. The order is not so much the important part, but if it's after Mac OS installation, the installer will copy the Winclone image to the Mac partition and install it from there. And that can add a whole bunch of additional time. And in fact, it can actually give errors if you have a very large Winclone package or a very large Windows installation. So the key to this is you do before Mac OS installation, and that means it's not going to have to repackage that Winclone package. So if you do that, it'll just basically install it directly from the resources, and it'll be very efficient that way, and it'll already do larger Winclone packages. In fact, there should be no limit except for disk space for the size of the Winclone package. I'll select my scripts folder just like we did the packages, but it'll actually be the scripts. And finally, I'll choose the profile folder, which I created, and I'll install those 2 profiles. User account, I'm able to create a service account, so I'll call this tcadmin, short name tcadmin, password, I'll just make it Twocanoes. I'll show it to verify. Yep, that's correct. 501's a good one. I'm not going to add an SSH key, but I could add this in here, and then it'd be very easy to SSH into these machines. Password hint, I'll say standard, and I'll allow the user to administer the computer. Then other options, we will select a Wi-Fi network to join. So this is our corporate network, and set the computer name. I'll actually have it prompt for the computer name. I'll have it skip the setup assistant, but still keep location services, so the time zone will be set correctly. I want to skip the user privacy because then they won't have to be able to fill that out. I'll enable SSH and also screen sharing, so this machine is available remotely. And that's it. So I set up all these different options. And so now I have 2, that's the workflow options. And the next piece I want to look at is these options are ones that apply when we're booted up in the recovery partition or from the external drive. How do you want to kind of manage that workflow? And so this will connect up to Wi-Fi in the recovery partition because the Mac OS installer requires a network connection to be able to verify and download any firmware updates. I'll select Dual Boot Lab and have it run the Dual Boot Lab one automatically after 8 seconds. And also have it send remote logging. And so we have a remote logging window here. I can hit start, then I'll be able to monitor the process as it goes forward. That's basically the configuration I need to set up this Dual Boot Lab. So install macOS, profiles, scripts, packages, as well as a Bootcamp partition. And so now at the bottom here, I have 2 options. One is to save to volume, where I can save it to an external drive and walk over and install it. Or you can save it to a disk image, and you can deploy it from a web server. So I'll do the disk image because that one is usually very convenient. And I'll just change the name to Dual Boot Lab, all lowercase because that's just kind of easier to type. And then I'll click Save. So it'll go ahead and take and copy all the resources to that disk image, and it'll create the disk image, and then I can make it available on a web server to be able to install that dual boot. All right, now it's saved successfully, and now I have that Dual Boot Lab disk image on my desktop, and so I can copy this to my web server. So I'll just do go connect to server, and I have one here. I'll just do smb imac.local. There's web services on a local iMac here on my network. I'll copy that over, and it's on shared. Actually, I already have it mounted. So if I go into shared, and then I'll just copy this Dual Boot Lab into my shared folder. So once that's done copying, I'll show you how to get access to the URL for that file. Okay, the image has now been, the disk image has now been copied to the web server. So I open up a web browser, and I'll just go to web services I've turned on that iMac. And you can see that I have a dualbootlab.dmg that's available. And if I right click on it, I can see, if I copy this link, I can see the link is imac.local/dualbootlab.dmg. You could also host this over an SMB server. It doesn't really matter, but I like to use HTTP just because it allows me to easily verify it, and web services are pretty lightweight. So I got that URL. So now what I'll do is I'll switch over to a Mac and actually boot from the recovery partition and create the Bootcamp partition, restore Winclone image on it, then install macOS and all those packages and profiles, all with just a few steps up front, and then it'll do everything else automatically. Okay, I'll now boot into the recovery partition. And from there I can go ahead and mount the disk image and run the workflow. I'm now in the recovery partition and I'm able to run the workflow. But in order to get access to the workflow, I had to mount that disk image that's on their web server. So built into the Mac is a utility called HDIUtil, and we'll send the command mount, and then we'll just give the URL imac.local/dualbootlab.dmg. And then I'll mount that disk image. You can see it mounted, and then I do a mounted volume called MDS, and I'll just run the run script. First thing I'll do as we set it up is connect to Wi-Fi. We don't actually need Wi-Fi for this setup because I would hooked up through Ethernet because it'd be a lot faster. But I did specify that in the workflow, so it'll actually do it. And then the next thing it'll do is it'll start up Imager, which is our workflow selector, and it'll bring it to the front, and it'll automatically run the workflow. And from there, it'll prompt me to set the computer name. Once that's set, everything else takes off and is automatic. You can actually have it set up automatically for the computer name, but in this case, we wanted to manually specify it because we're doing it based on a property tag or something like that. If you can fully automate it, that's great too. But for this, I'll just accept the serial number. And now it's going to go ahead and run the workflow. First thing it does is it's going to erase the Mac hard drive, and then it's going to run the Winclone image before it installs the packages. And so it will create a partition and then restore our Winclone image onto it. There it goes. So it's actually running the installing the Winclone image. So that's going to run for a little bit. It'll install the Winclone image, and then it'll reboot, install macOS, all the packages, profiles, and scripts, and then we'll come back and we'll see the final result, which should be a fully operational system with macOS, dual boot, and all the packages. All right, so now the MDS workflow is complete, and I'll log in. So you see it created this TC admin account as I specified. So I'll log in with this account. I have to type the password correct. There we go. So I'm logging into the account, and I'm going to look to make sure that the profile is installed, make sure the Bootcamp partition is installed, and then I'll log out and make sure that boot runner. First thing you'll notice, the dock's on the left side. And on the right side, or on the background, is my custom background. So I know that that works. That means my scripts ran. If I go into System Preferences, under Profiles, you can see that my profile's installed. 2 profiles plus this one script install a profile. And then I'll verify that I do actually have a Bootcamp partition. And there's all of the files for Windows. So it looks like my Winclone image restored. So it looked like everything was successful. I'll go log out and just verify that boot runner is indeed installed and ready to go. We have a full dual boot system now that has software installed from scratch and rebuilt it, and it took about 35 minutes. So please be sure to subscribe to the channel, as well as visit our website, Twocanoes.com, and check out the different walkthrough guides for both Winclone and MDS. So thank you very much for watching, and be sure to check back. Thank you.